The Book of She. So doesn't that title get your attention? Just when I say it, the Book of She. So I've been writing the Book of She as I've been talking about Sarah's book all week on Facebook, and as I've been writing it, I'm enjoying just writing the Book of She. And I'm enjoying just saying it. Every time I say it, the Book of She. It feels so good to me. So not only are we going to meet the best-selling author of this new book, we're also going to meet a woman who will share with us a brand new roadmap for feminine empowerment in the 21st century, the Heroine's journey. A lot of people talk about the inner journey, about yoga, about the divine feminine, and about the things we can do to feel happy, whole, and fulfilled in today's busy and beautiful and crazy world. But there are a few people who bring the depth of life experience at such an early age to that investigation. That's what happens when you're in your 20s and you're diagnosed with the early stages of cervical cancer and go to another country and another culture, Thailand, to learn about healing and womanhood in a whole new way. She definitely has the credentials and the fancy education. Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude. She's a graduate of Columbia University's all-women's Barnard College. She's the founder of The Way of the Happy Woman, her first book. She's the creator of the She School and one of the world's first women's yoga teacher trainings. Over the past 15 years, Sara has uplifted tens and thousands of women worldwide. But at the heart of it all, her inspiration has been the quest to finding the feminine heart and how we bring that alive in our lives and our bodies today. So Sara is my dear friend. She's my colleague. We share the same beloved mountain, Mount Sanitas, as many of you do. We hike it almost every day, and we run into each other almost every day. This book took a lot for her to birth. It was a hard labor. I watched her through it, and I was one of many family and friends that loved her through it. And I'm incredibly honored that 30 minutes ago she said, "Will you introduce me?" So I said, of course. So I would love to welcome Sara Avant Stover.
Thank you so much, Barry. It is such a joy to be here tonight with all of you, with familiar faces, with friends and family. My mom, Sarah Sr., is here from Chicago. How do we thank our mothers? I don't even know how to thank you. My sister Christian is here, and my fiance Keith. And right before I came on, my mom gave me a little picture of my niece Hattie, who's just like the cutest little thing ever. So I have her here as my good luck charm. And 4.5 years ago, I stood on this stage, and I shared with many of you and with the world my first book, The Way of the Happy Woman. Publishing that book was a dream come true. I have wanted to be an author since I was a very little girl. And ever since I first came to Boulder in my early 20s, I had wanted to speak here at the Boulder Book Store. So this book was a big success. It was a #1 bestseller here at the Boulder Book Store for about a month. Thank you, Boulder. It was a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And as I was stepping out into the spotlight in a bigger and bigger way, inwardly there was a different story unfolding. And I started to feel an increasing gap between being this bright persona in the world and feeling inside like things were coming undone. And the story I'm going to share with you tonight is how I bridged that gap, the journey that it took to do that. the journey that is the heroine's journey. But before we explore the heroine's journey, it's important that we first understand what the hero's journey is. Now, I know many of us in Boulder are really familiar with that, but it was discovered by a late scholar named Joseph Campbell in the mid-1900s. And he studied cultures around the world throughout time, and amongst them all, he found a common recurring, what he called a monomyth, kind of a path of becoming, mostly for young men. So what this consists of in brief is that a young man is living his ordinary life, and he receives a call to go out on a quest. First, he resists and fights that call, but ultimately becomes too strong to ignore. So he heads out into the unknown. He faces countless challenges, slays many dragons. And in the heart of the unknown he lands in what Joseph Campbell called the abyss. And there he faces his death, either metaphorical or literal or both. And there is his transformation. Supernatural aid pours in, and there is a rebirth. And he goes back to his community and he shares his gifts. So the hero's journey, there's not much room in it for us as women. And this is understandable. I mean, Joseph Campbell was writing and teaching at a time when most women were housewives. So when we fast forward 60 years to here and now, we are in a world that has rapidly changed and is rapidly changing. So within the next generation, women will be out earning men in the West. Here and now, for every 3 women that receives her bachelor's degree, there are 2 men who receive theirs. The majority of job and scholarship opportunities are going to women rather than to men. So the consequences of this for men are pretty surprising and dire, and that's a conversation for another time. But tonight, we're here to talk about the implications for us as women. How do we orient within this rapidly changing landscape? So tonight I'm going to share with you a map, a road map of the heroine's journey. In my heart, I am a teacher and a storyteller and a very enthusiastic introvert. So I'm going to share with you some personal stories so that you can really experience and taste the 5 stages of the heroine's journey. Before we go into that, I want to share a little disclaimer. Now, I know that Boulder is a pretty progressive place, so it's hard to shock us here. But some of these stories may seem surprising. And they were to me too. That was my call out of the known and into the unknown. So I invite you to come along with me with an open heart and an open mind. Does that sound good? Okay. So let's go on our journey. Stage 1. Leaving your normal life. It's October 30th, 2010. I've just submitted the final manuscript for my first book, The Way the Happy Woman. And I drove down to Santa Fe, New Mexico, one of my favorite places in the world, to attend a public speaking intensive with my coach to prepare for the book talk that I'll give several months later. While I'm there, it's the night before my final presentation, and I'm really nervous. Oh my gosh. I've never given a talk without notes before. I don't know if I can do it. I'm not sure if I'll be able to sleep that night, but I put my notes away, I click out the light, and I cozy up under the covers. Several minutes later, a jolt to awakeness. Shh. What's that? I hear the click, click, click. The footsteps outside on the stone patio. I hear the shh of a long red dress outside. And then I see her. She walks in through the closed and locked window. And in an instant, she is in bed with me, her arms wrapped around me, soothing me and cuddling me in a way that I've always longed for. And even though I never met her, I knew in an instant that this was Mary Magdalene. And she stroked my hair and she told me, Sarah, you are my daughter. You are here to do my work in the world. And I will always support you. My heart understood what she meant, but it was going to take years for my mind to as well. Stage 2, the descent. Now it's August 2011. My book had come out in the spring. It had been 9 months since that encounter in Santa Fe. And since then, my life had grown increasingly challenging and very, very intense. So I called my teacher, Sophia Diaz, my teacher in feminine spiritual practice, and requested a private session with her. So we met and sat across from each other. We started as we always do. We closed our eyes and we took a full breath in and out. And when we opened our eyes, she invited me to share with her why I had come. I told her about my meeting with Mary Magdalene and the many more since then. I told her about my crippling insomnia and anxiety and how I would go to a social gathering and the room would start spinning. Or I'd be home alone at night and I'd feel like an arrow struck me in the center of my heart and I couldn't stop crying. I didn't know why. I feel like I'm going crazy, Sophia, I told her. I don't know what's happening to me. And then I shared a confession that a few weeks earlier, since she was out of town, I sought solace in a place I always had, in the patriarchy. I went to meet with a Zen Roshi to try to understand what was happening. I left incredibly disheartened and unseen, and he basically told me that he felt like it was my neuroses and I should get back to my real practice. Sophia listened not only with her ears, but with her whole body. And she replied, Sarah, this is a hallelujah moment. Don't you see? This is what you've been praying for and practicing for all these years. This is the sacred feminine blossoming inside of you. But first, I gotta say, now, you know I love me some Zen, but Sarah, why on earth did you go to the most patriarchal tradition in the world to answer for what is a very feminine being having a very feminine realization. Now, I can help you work with this. First, stop saying when it happens to me, when it comes over me. No, you have to take ownership. Say, when she comes to me, when she speaks to me. Second, you have to apologize to Mary. You asked her to come, and then you've just been ignoring her and running from her, locking her out. You need to heal that. And third, forgo your meditation practice for now. Instead, sit at your altar morning and night, come hell or high water, and open up this channel of divine communication and trust what comes through. I left that meeting completely dizzy and disoriented. I had never expected that that's what she would say. Stage 3, the initiation. Now it's December 20th of that year, the very end of the year. I had been following Sophia's suggestion, and Mary's guidance led me to Snowmass, Colorado, to St. Benedict's Monastery for a week-long solitary retreat. Now, you don't need to point out the irony of this, that once again I went to a very patriarchal place to commune with the divine feminine, but I trusted that Mary had something in mind and that somehow it would make sense. So I spent the week going to Mass. I was reconnecting with my Catholic roots for the first time since childhood and taking communion for the first time in decades. And then the rest of the day I spent on my own. I would go for long walks in the snowy silence. I would sit at my altar and pray and practice yoga. And on the last evening, I decided to do a celebratory yoga practice. I'm kind of dorky, that's my way of celebrating. And I did something I don't normally do. I felt inspired to practice to music. So I opened up my computer and pulled up iTunes, and I hit shuffle. And the song that came on was the Buddhist chant, Om Mane Padme Hum. The jewel of the lotus flower is within. So I came to my yoga mat and started to move through the practice as I had so many times before. But something this time was different. A warm, loving presence started to move from my belly down through my legs and arms, into my fingers and toes. And my body started to move in a very, what felt like ancient and sacred dance. Something I had never learned, but somehow knew very well. And my heart just burst open in a river of blessing for the 12 monks whom I knew were sleeping down the hill from me, for all of the challenges in my life, for all of the people that I knew and all the places I had been. And I felt I had known this place during all of my Buddhist meditation retreats in Thailand, but I knew it as a silent and empty euphoria. That night, I knew it fully as a woman through all the bends and curves of my body. And I knew why Mary had brought me there. To really experience this feminine power, even in a patriarchal setting. Practice for what I would need to do in the world. Stage 4. the ascent. I headed home. The new year came, January 2012. I had been following Mary's guidance and dismantling every different corner of my life, including all of my professional offerings. And I felt now it was time to rebuild from scratch. So I made the biggest investment of my life. I cashed out my retirement IRA, and I hired a really high-end business coach. And I told her everything about Mary Magdalene, everything about this gap that I was trying to bridge between inner and outer, and she helped me to rebuild. And as I did this, more and more women started to come to me with crises. One young woman I was working with for a few years, she came to me, she had a resurgence in eating disorder, in binge eating. She had been working as a life coach, coaching other women through the same, and had done a ton of work on herself. She couldn't understand why this was happening. And she said, "Sarah, I feel like a failure. I feel like a fraud. Why can't I just be normal again?" And because I had just been through that, I could give her the reframe that this too was her opportunity to step into becoming the leader that she was born to be. Stage 5, the homecoming. We do not become heroines without a homecoming. We do not become heroes without a homecoming. This book is my homecoming. These words that I'm sharing tonight are my homecoming. And there are countless gems I could share with you. They're all shared in the book, but tonight I'm going to share with you 3. The first one is your challenges are your on-ramp to the heroine's journey. They are your portal to evolving, to growing, to becoming who you really want to be. The second gem is that we need to have so much compassion for ourselves. This is the first time we're doing this in history. We don't have thousands of years of strong female leadership and role models to draw upon. We're figuring this out for the first time. So it's going to be messy. It's going to be chaotic. It's going to be hard sometimes. We also need to have ruthless compassion for ourselves. We need to bring all parts of ourselves on this journey, the most horrific and the most sublime. And when I realized that, then I understood why Mary Magdalene had come to me. She is the archetype of the whole and holy heroine. Scholars tell us that she was the lover to Jesus. She was his most devoted apostle. She was a realized master in her own right. She was a mother and a daughter. And throughout history, she was also ostracized for being a whore. So within this one archetype, we pour all of our projections of the feminine, the most divine and the lowest. But she shows us what's possible for us now as modern women. That we don't need to be either or. We don't need to be just smart or just sexy. We don't need to be the good girl, or we don't need to be the popular girl. We don't need to be just the mother or just the career woman. We can have a really dynamic interplay between all of these things to the degree that we desire. We get to choose. And the third and final gem is that this is really urgent. Don't wait until tomorrow or next month or next year to start on your journey. We can finally answer the call. We don't need to journey off to the other side of the world. We can do it here in our lives. For the first time, we can really author our lives in whatever way we want. This has been the most magical, most challenging, most blessed experience of my life. And I want each of you to experience the same in your own way. So please step into it. Your heroine's journey awaits. Thank you. So we'll open up the floor if there are any questions. Comments or yes.
So you're an extreme introvert, you said?
Yes.
So how do you overcome that? So, I mean, how do you do what you do? Speak to people in teach.
I'm not an introvert when I speak or teach.
I could tell.
So it's and I think that's common for a lot of introverts. It's using that deep time of going inwards and that deep self-reflection, and then coming out and feeling inspired to share it. So when I can come out and share the things that I'm passionate about and share the discoveries that I have from my inner landscape, then it's easy for me to just come out and do what I need to do. Doesn't mean I don't get nervous, but it's a great joy. Thank you. Allie?
I have two questions. The first one is, when you were in the ascent, did you know?
No, I didn't know where I was at any stage, which is part of the problem. I felt so lost. It wasn't until later that I could place this map over my experience. And that was why I wrote the book, because I want other women to have this map and to see, oh, that's where I am in the journey. And then that's coming next. But I had no idea.
And so during the time of ascent, because I'm like trying to place myself, I'm like, am I in the ascent yet? But it still feels like there's lots of challenges. So the challenges are always there, right? It's just how you are internally with the challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, the challenges are always here. And again, like the challenges are here, they make us stronger when we partner with them. And the heroine's journey lasts for our entire lives. And who knows what happens after we die, maybe continues on. I can't say that yet, but it's a big arc, and then there's lots of little journeys throughout.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allie. Brett?
Would you be willing to share what your relationship with Mary is like now?
Sure.
And also if there are other guys that have come to you, or if it's just monogamous with her?
We're just exclusive.
Yeah.
I don't feel a presence with Mary Magdalene anymore. I remember when I was writing my book, I was listening to a talk with Carolyn Mace and Ken Wilber about her experience entering the castle about St. Teresa of Avila. And she shared with him that St. Teresa came to her, which led her to write the book, but then there was one day where she just felt that she was gone. And I was so scared. I told Keith, I was like, I hope that doesn't happen to me. I don't want Mary to leave. But I don't feel Mary Magdalene's presence anymore in the way that I did. But I do feel Mother Mary. And in my book, I write about, since I was a little girl, I've had a strong relationship with Mother Mary. That at that time, or in retrospect, I just wrote it off as my imagination. But I feel that that's like the guiding force in my life now. And there were other encounters along the way. Each part of the book has kind of a different person coming in. There's Emily Dickinson, there is the Golden Dakini, there's the Temple Priestess, whom I met at a strip club here in Boulder, and there's Green Tara. So lots of different archetypes that share different pieces of wisdom along the way.
Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Rach.
I just want to acknowledge you. I've been reading your book, looking forward to curling up in bed each night, reading it. It's been really good. I love it. And I also work with women in crises a lot of times. And your teachings, like you're really such a teacher for me because you've helped me to help other women to embrace the dark and the light. And it's so powerful and it's so beautiful. And then just recently, like starting to speak to women and have conversations like this anger, these different parts of ourselves, like your book is really helping me to really identify with a goddess, because it's always been a god for me. And the conversations I've always had with people have always been about my relationship with God as a man. And this book is a further step on the path for embracing that I am she lives in me, and she is not just male. So I love it, and it's really influenced other women as well. So I just honor you and thank you for the leadership, the feminine leadership that you provide.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, and that one of the things that inspired me during the ascent and this rebuilding process was that I had seen so many other women teaching, wonderful women teaching about wellness and spirituality, but it was always kind of the bright and shiny unicorn and rainbows spirituality. And I had been part of that, but I knew that I needed to bring the whole spectrum in and to allow other women a space to also experience that and to feel safe in that. Duncan.
So I want to speak as a man in terms of the dialogue that you and I did that was on KGNU last Sunday afternoon on Living Dialogues. That one of the things that I have really been struck with and informed by your book, having worked with mythology and Joe Campbell for decades and with the culture and how we need to bring back the feminine, how we need to bring back the goddess, was the insight in your encounter, among others, with the Zen monk, where he was basically, as I thought you quite brilliantly said, telling you to go the masculine path of getting into imperturbable awareness. And you were feeling these very feminine, embodied emotions and eruptions, and he couldn't really tune into that because there wasn't really a model for understanding this very kind of embodied, you might say, energy of the feminine that really is not dealt with by the masculine meditative Zen model of going for imperturbable awareness. And you said, I thought quite tellingly, that the masculine, that the Zen model is actually a masculine model, and in its own neurotic way, when it's not really tuned in universally, it is disembodied. And what I found so interesting about your experience was that you're uncovering a feminine path that is embodied, like the indigenous way, like we get embodied in our experience of being one with the living universe and not transcending through meditation. So I just want to say, as a man, how interesting it was and informative to read your book and to have the encounter we had, on KGNU. It was just really wonderful. And I would say any men that are here or that hear this recording, that they should all read it. I think it's got a lot to say for both men and women.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very impressed in our conversation for the radio interview. Duncan had read the whole book is filled with Post-it notes, and just had read it cover to cover and had really contemplated it. So thank you for the great interview and for sharing
Dialogue.
the dialogue.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I haven't read the book yet, but I was intrigued enough to come here and hear you speak. And I think what you're doing is really needed because women are trying to force themselves into a masculine path, and it's very frustrating. So I think this provides another avenue that says, go with your nature, go with who you actually are, and still do all those things you're trying to do, but do it in a feminine way, not a masculine way.
Yes. Thank you.
Will you speak to that in terms of this process of bringing a book to the world and how you infused your experience with the feminine and the heroine's journey instead of it just being shoehorning yourself into the masculine way of doing it?
Yeah.
Really curious about that.
Well, in the Ascent in the book, there's a chapter called Marrying the Divine Masculine. And so before we can come to our homecoming, there is this integration that needs to happen. So in the Descent, we really go into our femininity. We go into the parts of ourselves that we've stuffed into the cellar of our bodies or our psyches. We explore our relationships with our mothers and their relationship with their grandmothers. And then we come to marrying the divine masculine. So I have a lot of masculine energy, which I think I used to be ashamed of and think, oh, I need to be more feminine. I mean, I am very feminine, but I felt like, oh, I should be in like those goddess circles with rose petals and flowy clothes, and it just was never really my thing. So this book took the marriage, really, of my feminine and masculine to be receptive to this stream of wisdom that really wanted to come through as a book. And the messiness of the creative process. Like, this book came out a year and a half after it was supposed to. There were so many challenges along the way, so just surrendering to that. But then also using my masculine to have a lot of discipline, took tremendous discipline to finish this book. And really strong boundaries to be really myopic, as my fiance can attest to. The last couple of months of writing it, it was just all about the book. So it really takes the dance of both. Yeah. Yes.
Could you elaborate on that? Could you elaborate on your experience in the monastery? You said you had it felt feminine mind and everything. It sounds like it was almost like a mystical experience. St. Teresa or something like that. Did it change your life afterwards?
Very much so. It was one of it. I think. I mean, I'm only almost 38, but it's one of the highlights of my life so far, and just the immense freedom and joy that I felt in the midst of just feeling like everything was falling apart, and the strength that comes in feeling free in a moment in life like that, and the tasting of knowing that that's really who I am, that's really who we are, and that oftentimes there's so much that just blocks us from seeing that or knowing it, and feeling it really just as this immense love through my body. It's very powerful.
And what do you think led to it? How did you get to that point? Do you think it was just that week, or was it the last 20 years?
I think it was my whole life, and that's a lot of why I had so much gratitude in that moment, is like just my life of practice and perhaps even lifetimes, and it's just a moment of grace. I write about it more in depth in the book too. And go into more of the details of it. Thank you. Was there something else you wanted to say, or did?
No, I think it was good. No, it seems like that's sort of a universal experience, that kind of awakening, experience. But don't think we know about that. About statistics on that. So, something where it's just interesting and happening when things are falling apart. You have this freedom comes. How can everyone get to that point?
Yeah, it's like the rebirth happens. So, Joseph Campbell's Abyss, when we're backed into a corner and we can't see our way out. So we have to surrender, and that supernatural aid pours through, and then there's a new beginning. But we can't see that until we surrender. And it's not really up to us fully when we surrender. It's part up to us and part not. Yeah.
Would you want to take this opportunity to discuss a little bit that so-called controversial chapter on the temple priestess? Because I thought one of the very interesting aspects of your book was that the aspect in all of us of the feminine, we might say, is really our sensual or sexual side. I mean, traditionally in all the archetypes. And you made a frontier-like discovery right here in River City, in Boulder, that you write about in the book. And when we talked about it, you said that it was somewhat controversial and you had to fight to get it included in the book. And I told you I was really glad you did, because you sort of opened a whole space there that the modern mind, masculine, patriarchal culture tends to put in some kind of dark cellar. And when I mentioned that to a couple of the women on Sunday who were there taking pledges, they were initially a little bit, what, aback? I said, read it, trust me. You're going to find some really interesting information in there that breaks the taboo and the idea that the culture has of, in this case, it was a strip club here in Boulder.
Yeah. I thank you for bringing that up. And I'm actually not going to talk about that tonight, because I feel like I didn't share that story because there's so many nuances to it
Yes,
that
better to read it. Right.
I'd rather that you read it.
Yes,
so
I agree.
It's in there for anyone who's interested in diving in. But yes, I had to fight to keep it in the book.
And I agree with you that it has subtle dimensions. It's much better that people read it and take it in rather than try to abbreviate it in a short take care. I fully agree with that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm glad you kept it in.
Yeah, me too.
Without saying anything about the chapter, can you share a little about the fight to keep it in, and what was the argument against it, and what you had to do in the face of that or say?
Sure. I have a lot of gratitude for my publisher, New World Library, and I had a very challenging time with editing this book because I didn't want to water it down, but I also wanted to make it accessible. And there were some areas where my editors wanted me to change certain things, and I had to draw the line and say, no, I actually mean it to be that way. And the chapter on the strip club and the temple priestess, they just kept saying this is way too controversial. Women are going to think that you are agreeing with objectifying them. And I had to keep adding more things into that section to set it up, to frame it in a way that women could see that that's not where I'm coming from, and that I really need you to see this other perspective, which is going back to the role of the sacred prostitute, or the dakini in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition of women sharing their spiritual realization through their bodies and their sexuality.
Thank you for fighting that fight.
What's that?
Thank you for fighting that fight.
Yeah. Finally, they just dropped it and I didn't hear anything. But Keith would hear me screaming from my office, like, oh my God!
in the book that took you to the strip club?
That's him.
That's you?
Yeah.
Well done.
He was my chaperone and he coached me through it. Great coach.
What made you want to go to the strip club? I mean, your
That's my mom asking
Your
me.
mother asked you the question. Without giving away the.
Yeah, I had always had a lot of resistance to them. I had a lot of judgment and I had a lot of fear. And my teacher, Sophia, I had heard rumors that she would send some students to strip clubs, to female students, just to kind of see the parts of ourselves that we're resisting. So I felt like I was ready to face whatever that was. And the strip club here on just a couple blocks away on Pearl Street is a good one to go if you're a first timer. Yes.
I'm just curious, if you know Ariana Saraha?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed to me when seeing her perform, she's a musician and singer, that she was like channeling divine energy and feeling it and working with it.
She's a beautiful artist, yeah.
Yeah.
She sang, and I created some yoga DVDs several years ago, and she sang in those.
Yeah, I was knocked out, and when I saw her, that I really kind of got the goddess thing, not just some woo-woo village stuff, but actual living, breathing embodiment of, and humbly working with and evoking feminine energy, and giving it to everyone, the audience, male and female. I just had to know.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So thank you all so much for coming out tonight and for going on this journey with me. I'm going to be sticking around to sign anyone's books if you'd like me to sign. And I just send you my heartfelt blessings on your way.
Thank you.
Good night.